Good morning. Welcome to Sweet Tea's Quilting. We are going to be working on the first block of our block of the month. In case you're new to our block of the month program, we're going to be making 2 blocks each month, and at the end of the year you will have 24 blocks that you can set into a sampler quilt. Throughout the year you can also use these individual blocks to create quilts using just these patterns. The block we're going to be creating today is called a twisted rail fence block. It's made up of 4 smaller individual rail fence squares, and that's what we're going to be creating. The rail fence quilt has been around in America since colonial times, and actually it came about because the colonial farmers who first settled here had to find a way to contain their livestock. And so they cut down the trees and they split the logs and then interlocked them and created rail fences. And that's how the rail fence block was born. So what we're going to need today is you're going to need your rotary cutter and your cutting mat. Mine's on my table. A 6.5 inch square, a 12.5 inch square, an iron, and a pressing surface. Your sewing machine set to 1/4 inch or with your 1/4 inch sheet that we talked about in our Quilting 101 tutorial, and your 3 colors of fabric, your dark, your medium, and your light. In just a minute we'll get started cutting our block. Okay, we are going to need to begin by creating these strips, which we will piece together. Each strip needs to be cut 2.5 inches by 6.5 inches. That will allow for our 1/4 inch seam allowance when we piece them together. So we're going to take our 6.5 inch acrylic ruler. We're going to lay it so that the 2.5 inch line is alongside the edge of our fabric, and we need to have the entire 6.5 inch length of the ruler. We're going to cut along the side. Now remember your safety tips when using your rotary cutter. You do not want to put your fingers anywhere close to that cutter blade. Too many people want to do it this way, and that's how we end up with accidents at the hospital. Always keep your hands a safe distance from the ruler. Okay, I've made the first 2 cuts. I'm going to rotate my fabric. I'm going to line up on that 2.5 inch line, lining up down here at the bottom on the 6.5. And you can see I have a little knobby here I need to cut off. So I'm going to, all right, we're going to continue to cut those 2.5. You can see even I have problems cutting sometimes. 2.5 by 6.5. And we want to end up with 4 of each of our colors. So I'm going to cut 4 of each color, and I'll meet you back here in just a second. You can stop. Okay, we now have 4 2.5 by 6 inch pieces of each of the colors, the light, the medium, and the dark. This block works best if you use a light, a medium, and a dark to create this pinwheel effect that we're going to be creating. So we need to decide on our arrangement, and I have 2 choices here. I can do the light, medium, dark, or I could rearrange that and put the light in the middle. I might do that this time just to see what the effect is. We're going to stack our blocks the way we want to sew them, our strips, the way we want to sew them. And we're going to take those to the sewing machine to piece them together. Remember, we have to use our 1/4 inch seam, and if you have forgotten to get a 1/4 inch foot, go ahead and use the business card trick that we learned the other day. Get yourself a piece of tape and a business card, measure that 1/4 inch, tape that down so you'll be ready. Okay, let's go to the sewing machine and sew these. Okay, we want to start by piecing the first 2 blocks. Remember our hints for easing pressing that we talked about in the Quilting 101 tutorial. Start with your dark piece on top. You're going to carefully line up that corner and line up all the way down the length. You notice I'm not using any pins in these pieces. It's easier for me just to finger press them in place and hold them as I go. Also remember we're using this 1/4 inch adjustment. Don't forget to do that. I'll lower my presser foot and I'm going to stitch just that 1/4 inch. If you make a seam too large, your block will not end up being the right size. You need to make sure about your seam allowances. Seam allowances and pressing are the two most important things when quilting. Okay, so I end up with this piece, and you can see here is my 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, I decided I wanted to add the red to the white. Again, I want to put the darker color on top to sew this. So I am going to line up that little corner, line it up down the edge, lower my presser foot, and we have our first unit. All right, meet me at the pressing station. We have to press the seams open. Okay, remember we want to press to the dark side, as Darth Vader says. Go to the dark side. So press that to the dark side. Press this to the dark side. Flip your block over. Do the same thing from the top. A little bit of steam never hurts anybody. Nice and crisp. All right, and we have our first block. We need to measure it and be sure that it is 6.5 inches square. So lay it on your cutting surface. Place your 6.5 inch ruler on top of it, and look at that. It is a perfect 6.5 inch square. We're going to do that with the other 3 pieces, and then when we come back together, we're going to join them all to form our twisted rail fence pinwheel type design. We now have 4 6 by 6.5 by 6.5 3-strip rail fence blocks. Remember, our goal is that we are going to make this rail fence pinwheel. So we need to rearrange these blocks to make a pleasing formation. I'm going to place them so that the blacks all meet in the center. The dark color, mine is black. So we need to turn them. We're going to have one going across, and then the one underneath of it will go up and down. The one over here will go up and down. And then the last one will go across. And you can see that will give us that cross or pinwheel effect in the center. Now I could have chosen to put the red ones in the center. We would have the same design, but it would look different. There are a lot of different ways you can do this. I actually like that better with the red ones in the center. So that's how I'm going to sew it together. We need to sew these 2 units together and then these 2 units together. So I'm going to flip this top one down. I'm going to be sewing right across here to make this seam. Okay, so I'm going to attach this long edge to the 3 short edges, lining up my corner, again using that 1/4 inch seam allowance. I want my block to come out the right size. Making sure things stay lined up straight. this is what we end up with. I need to now sew the other two together. I'm going to flip the top one down, line up these edges, use that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now we have 2 units. These 2 units are going to need to be joined in the middle. You can see that the seams should line up exactly, but we've got to make sure that they are flat. So we need to press the seams in place. So we're going to press toward the long piece of fabric. And we're going to do the same thing on the other piece, pressing toward the long piece of fabric. And when we look at these from the back, you'll notice that one seam is going to the left, the other seam is going to the right. We can nest those together so that they interlock. And then we will stitch this together and we'll have a finished block in just a second. Okay, so here's our finished block, and if you'll take a close look here at this intersection, you'll see that these seams lined up exactly. Okay, you can see though it's not flat yet. We need to press everything down. Remember the tip we learned in our Quilting 101 tutorial. If we press all of our seams counterclockwise, we will end up with a little flat spot in the center. You'll see that there's a little stitch in here. Try to get something to press that open with. There's a little stitch right in here that we're going to have to remove to be able to do that. Okay, and it's just where you started your stitching earlier. Comes off very easily. Now you can pull this seam open, finger press it down, take it to the pressing surface. Again, all those major seams, we're going to go counterclockwise. I'm not ironing. I don't want to skew anything. I'm just pressing firmly on all of those major seams. A little square in the center there. Then you know what I need to do next. Flip it over, set the seams. And we have our finished block. The last step is to make sure that it actually measures 12.5 inches. And it does. And we have completed our twisted rail fence block. I hope you make a bunch of them. I hope you put them together to make a quilt. As you can see, just from these 2 I made, we could create a number of different designs with them by rearranging them. And that's all I have, and I'll see you next time. Thanks. By using just 2 colors instead of 3, you can create a really neat basket weave quilt design by turning one block horizontally and the other block vertically. That is a really neat look made from a simple block. By using 3 color blocks and altering the placement, you can create this really nice chevron effect. This is more of a traditional rail fence arrangement. Remember we said that they zigzagged those logs to create the fence? This is more of the traditional arrangement of the rail fence design. It creates a nice zigzag or chevron pattern. Works really well with 3 colors in your blocks like we just did. And then you have your pinwheel or twisted rail fence, which we just created.